Hello. Welcome to another episode of Season 16 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, the theme is B movies for C students. We're taking a break from the current trends toward elevated horror and examining the history of horror B movies and how they've developed over time. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. I feel like we're really hitting mid-season form.
Really? How so?
Well, it's just like getting ready for this episode. I was just like, boom, on it, in the headspace, ready to go, ready to watch this movie. I know the points I want to circle back to. Like, we're firing on all cylinders here.
Mm-hmm.
I would say I have thoroughly enjoyed learning about this B movie stuff.
Yeah.
Just because it's like movie making history.
Yeah.
And I kind of like general like history trivia stuff anyway. So it's been fun.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. I kind of felt like the first two was almost like getting back into the rhythm of it, because we did take, quite a break, which we did talk about. But when I was getting prepped for this one, I was there for it. Yeah. It's also the season of Bryce. Like, this is the season of Bryce, so I am
catering to your tastes.
It is, yeah. And I didn't even pick it out.
Yeah. This is really just kind of the alignment. I feel like our whole lives have been preparing us for this.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So this season, we are going through the different decades from the 30s until the 2020s, and we're watching B horror movies. And we have a whole kickoff episode talking about exactly what B movies are and what that means, and we'll reference that episode a lot. So if you haven't listened to it yet, go back and check it out. But this week, we're rolling right on to the 1940s, and we are watching the movie Cat People from 1942.
Dun, dun, dun.
And I'm not going to lie, this movie was like half the motivation for doing this whole theme for this season.
I can see that.
Because this movie has come up in so many lists of like horror movies, like influential horror movies, different genres where we've searched for like most popular ones in that genre. This one shows up a lot in like psychological and supernatural. And it's also like really early. And one thing, so this is a very, very non-scientific method, but one way I kind of judge relevance of a horror movie is to look at its Wikipedia page. And the Wikipedia page for this one, pretty healthy.
It was. Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff there.
And I think I can definitely also see some ways that this influenced future horror movies as well. But we'll get into all that. Before that, though, and before we do our introduction, I wanted to put this into context a little bit. So we talked in the intro about how B movies started off being made by like kind of the big Hollywood studios because they needed additional movies to show as like double features, because that's the way they were getting audiences to come and keep spending money in the 30s when the economy was bad. And so this one was made by RKO Radio Pictures, which was one of the big five Hollywood Golden Age studios. And I did not know if RKO was a big studio or not, because it doesn't exist today. So I did some reading, and apparently it was one of the big five at the time. It just went out of business in like 59 or something. So we're definitely still at the point where these movies are super low budget, but they're being made on the same set as the big high budget movies. And I feel like that elevates everything about the quality of them just a little bit, because they get the edge of being sort of inside the studio system. So they probably got some pretty good deals on equipment and whatnot.
I thought you were going to say they went out of business because they invested too much in B movies.
No.
That would have been pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Or actually, I thought that you were going to tell me they were bought out. Just seems like how it kind of works nowadays. But.
Yeah, I think the thing that I read said it went defunct. So I don't really know what that means. I don't know if that means somebody bought it or what. But anyway, RKO sounds obscure now, but was a really, really big deal at the time.
I also like the idea of like repurposing sets, mostly because I don't know if I would have like caught that it used another movie's like set. Like obviously we haven't seen every movie of all time. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of strange that they don't do that more often, and maybe they do and we just don't recognize it. I feel like nowadays I'll notice if like a TV show uses like the same set as like another TV show. So say it's like Family Matters, and another TV show, you know, nowadays comes out and it's like, oh, the staircase is in the same place. And the, you know, I kind of noticed that a little bit, but that's TV where we're watching it frequently. In the 40s, I can't see people watching it, recognizing those very often. So it's just frugal and not wasting money. So I support that.
Definitely. And if like you've already made the investment to build the set, one way that you can make another movie really cheaply is just to reuse it.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's like is that like in tech? I think that's why like they like when they budget stuff, they do it for the lifetime or for the life of the device. So it's like 3 years. So it's like, well, yeah, we paid $1,000 for this computer, but like we'll have it for 3 years. So it's technically $333. Yeah. It's kind of smart.
Amortization.
That's it.
Yeah. Another thing that was interesting about this movie is that it's post Hays Code. And I know that we've referenced that a lot in the past, especially when we were doing like our 100 Years of Horror. But something that kind of stood out to us in the past two movies that we did from the 30s was there was a lot of stuff in there that probably wouldn't have flown post Code. And I realized we never really went back and explained what the Hays Code was. So I've got just a quick thing I want to read. It came from an article on acmi.net called Early Hollywood and the Hays Code by Maria Lewis. Commonly referred to by its shorthand rather than the full title, the Hays Code was named after William H. Hays, who was the president of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America at the time. The Hays Code was this self-imposed industry set of guidelines for all the motion pictures that were released between 1934 and 1968, says O'Brien, who is being interviewed for the article. The code prohibited profanity, suggestive nudity, graphic or realistic violence, sexual persuasions, and rape. It had rules around the use of crime, costume, dance, religion, national sentiment, and morality. And according to the code, even within the limits of pure love or realistic love, certain facts have been regarded as outside the limits of safe presentation. So basically, this means we have a whole lot of married couples sleeping in separate beds for at least 20 years.
That's how... Wait. That's not what you do?
Well, we just don't have enough space because we live in Austin.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
It's purely a matter of budgeting, single bed. But yeah. So, yeah, I think that we will probably see a little bit of a maybe tone down over the next couple of weeks, because now we're in the age where we've got these movies that are being made sort of within that Hays Code. But the thing that was interesting to me is that I didn't realize it was like self-imposed. I thought it was a government thing. And so I'm curious, once we start getting into the more, you know, lower budget studio, like not the major studios, if we start seeing some of that stuff start to come back. But
yeah, I was fixing to say, like, we will definitely see more toned down, but I think we're still going to get... It's still going to be, there's going to be more things that wouldn't normally be allowed in mainstream because it's B. So I'm interested to see over the next few what we actually do get to see. Yeah. Because of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason I thought it was worth spending time talking about that now is there's some things in this movie too that it actually kind of surprised me that they made it in, given that. So we'll get into that and a whole lot more. But yeah, I'm going to do a quick introduction and then we will get into the scariest thing in this movie was Alice's disregard for the institution of marriage details. In 1942, RKO Radio Pictures brought us Cat People, a supernatural horror film written by DeWitt Bodine and directed by Jacques Tourneur. It tells the story of a Serbian immigrant who can't quite escape her troubled past or the dark secrets of the village where she grew up. Cat People was made on a budget of about $140,000, and oddly enough, its box office total is hotly disputed. But even the most conservative estimates maintain that the movie was very profitable. It can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video. Did it strike you as weird that this one was in black and white after the last movie that we did from 1932 was in Technicolor?
Yeah. I think that they were just like, you know what? It's not worth it.
Yeah.
Color's not that great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely a little off, but it was nicely done, so didn't really have too big of problems.
Yeah, this one, I think the camera quality was noticeably better than either of the last two movies that we watched. So this one kind of was starting to feel more like an episode of The Twilight Zone quality. Mm-hmm. And I'm here for it. But
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. This one was interesting. I wouldn't really lump it in with either of the last two, because I feel like the last two kind of followed the same formula where there was like you were just kind of thrown into it in the beginning. Like there was something exciting happening. Like you were part of a mystery or a treasure hunt or, some sort of conspiracy or the serial killer making his way across the city. This one is just kind of more like a slow build of like not really knowing what's going on and kind of like dread and suspense. And that was a really different vibe than what either of the previous ones were, I thought.
Yeah, it definitely was. I think it's one of the reasons why I kind of like B movies, though, is that it can be all over the place. This one was definitely more of a drama, in my opinion, but with a little dash of horror spice added to it.
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see with the one we review next week from the 40s if it's like a similar deal. Mm-hmm. Because the two from the 30s, I mean, if you kind of zoom out from the story, like super specific details, a lot of the way that those movies try to be engaging, it felt like was pretty similar. And then this one, I feel like, was a pretty big departure from that. Like, this one felt much more in line with like Psycho than it did like either of the movies that we watched from the 30s that were a little more actiony.
Yeah, 100%. Which yet again, I think it was okay. Like I don't know if they could have added anything else to this specific story to make it any different. Granted, I saw that I think a remake in '82 that came out, so I'm interested. I'm definitely gonna give that a watch. I want to see if it's the same concept, but still, it's not too bad.
Yeah, there were some things I really liked in this one, but there were also long parts that weren't all that engaging.
Really
I thought
boring.
Yeah. But I did really like that it introduced the idea of you in the audience not knowing if the person was crazy or if the danger was real. And so it was just kind of like that trope in horror movies of somebody talking to a psychologist and the psychologist saying things like, it's not the stories, it's the fact that you believe them, and it's your fear that's the real problem, and so on. And you don't really know what the truth is for a lot of the movie. You don't know how much of this is just going on like in her mind versus in reality. And I think that that's something that has been used a lot by horror movies over time, especially like in psychological horror, where you and the audience aren't completely confident in what's actually happening, and that gives you that sense of like suspense because you don't really know what to trust.
And I think that there could be good ways of going about that, where like you do get little pieces throughout the whole film, and but there are also bad ways, and one of my pet peeves is just like I feel like certain movies over time will just be like, you know what, throw in this horror aspect, and we'll call it like a drama horror, and supposedly it'll make sense, and it just seems kind of cheap and not that good. And with this one, I think I kind of saw it coming. However, I don't think I was necessarily as bothered, and like it definitely was the purpose of the film, was what we figured out at the end. But it's definitely something that you're going to see. I think we're going to see more of in upcoming weeks, I have a feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really ever doubt what was probably going to happen. It seemed like the movie was implying it very heavily, and they weren't really giving you any examples to make you second guess that assumption. Yeah. And so, yeah. But I guess super high level, the overall story is that there's this girl named Marina who has moved to the United States, but she grew up in this village in Serbia where a king had come and brought Christianity, but then some of the people turned their backs on it and were Satan worshippers, and so the king's soldiers came and either killed everybody or drove them out of the city, but some of them still survive and torment the town, and there's still like a curse that goes down, and people that are supposedly witches that become cat people. And she believes that she is a cat person because her mom was a witch, and is afraid that if she gets too close to her husband, like her inner evil will come out and she'll kill him. And then the husband, sensing that she's not super open to him, starts messing around with one of his coworkers, and then she gets mad, and then you start having these weird encounters between the cat and this big mysterious cat like creature, and then the husband and his office girlfriend. And so that all eventually comes to a head, and you kind of find out in general that she probably was the cat that was cutting things up. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. There were some things in this one that didn't make a whole lot of sense, but there were also some good scenes, I thought.
Yeah, I think I think it to me definitely felt like a long episode, a long TV episode. Like,
yeah,
and it probably has to do with the runtime of being like an hour and 12 minutes, or I think it was that. So like, I don't think I was necessarily as bothered by it, because I felt like it just went by fast for me when watching. And so, you know, for it being the 40s, it definitely, so with it being the 40s, it seems to me that what we got between the 40s and the 60s, when with Twilight Zone, there's not a huge difference in my opinion. Like, this is just a really long Twilight Zone episode at the end of the day, in my opinion. So I think I just kind of watched it with those goggles, which is why like it didn't necessarily bother me as much. There's also something about playing a B movie, black and white, from a long time ago. It's raining outside, because it's been raining here in Oklahoma quite a bit lately. It was just like a perfect kind of setup. So I was just there for it. It wasn't insanely hot yet in Oklahoma, which is about to be. But it kind of worked out for me. I think that I don't think I had as much problems with the story either, because we also just finished watching The Mask of Fu Manchu, which was a gnarly story.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think it made me a tad put off, just because I was like, well, this kind of does make more sense in certain situations than what we had been getting. I think I was expecting something more exaggerated to happen than a woman turning into a cat, because but it was just my expectation. So
no, I think I see what you're saying, in that I feel like the story and plot were a lot more thought through on this one, because they kind of had to be for it to work as more psychological horror.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like an action adventure story where, you know, you were just jumping from one thing to the next. There was kind of more of that slow burn.
Yeah.
And so it was really important that you understood sort of the relationship dynamics and the way that things progressed between Irina and Oliver, and then Oliver and his coworker, and the effect that that had on Irina, because that motivated her actions and stuff. And so I think I see what you mean, and that this one felt like more cohesive from a story perspective, even though there were some pretty fantastical elements to it. But yeah. And like I said before, I think there were some really good scenes in this one. I think my favorite was when Alice is walking home after Irina sees her with Oliver at the diner.
Yeah.
And then Irina's walking behind her, and you hear the sound of her like footsteps until all of a sudden they just stop. And like Alice is still walking, and then she's looking behind her, and then she stops and she's starting to get freaked out. And then you hear the cat growl, and then the bus pulls up really, really abruptly. And just like kind of the sound and the visuals and everything around that, it was almost like a jump scare. But it wasn't the thing that you were expecting it to be. You were expecting like the cat to come attack, but really it was like the bus, and it was like salvation rather than death.
Yeah. So
just kind of the subversion of expectations there. I thought that was just really, really well done, and a really good way to. I feel like with psychological horror, you kind of have to like build up to something, and then something happens, and then you have to like reset a little bit until you build up to the next thing. And that was just one of the best examples I've seen of that thing where you do the big build up and then the reset.
Yeah. And, you know, the thing with that scene as well is just that, in my opinion, was almost like the turning point. So that was when, like, from then on, which may have been just like 15 minutes, maybe, but maybe 20, was from then on was I knew we were going to get something at least a little bit more. We were going to get to maybe see the cat or what's actually happening, but you know, it did take a minute to get there. That scene was definitely dialed in. Definitely something that's that anticipation or the concern. I mean, that's something that has its claws in thriller, suspense, horror, like all around. Like that's been done. And I don't know if you can overdo it, considering the concept of, you know, of the trick. I guess if you do it too many times in the same film, it pisses me off. But still, but yeah, that was also exciting because it was the turning point.
Yeah.
However, the scene with when they're in the pool, that was drawn out. That was too much, in my opinion. There's too much screaming, and I think I was just like, my senses were just like, oh, I get it, but like, come on now.
I get what it was going for.
Yeah.
And agree with you that it was a little overdone. The look on Irina's face when she appeared, like right before the other people showed up, though,
yeah,
I thought was perfect.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And that scene was also one where I was kind of surprised that it was post code, because when Alice was in there just like changing into her bathing suit beforehand, I was just like, oh wow, okay, I guess they're just going to go with this. And then there was also that scene earlier where Irina is kind of starting to realize what's going on, and she's locked herself in the bathroom, and she's just sitting in the bathtub crying. And it's just like, oh, well, like, I mean, they're not showing anything, but she's like clearly fully nude in the scene. And I was kind of surprised that one made it through in the code too. So
yeah, that was definitely my thought as well. I also thought, like, with the pool scene, I was like, when did they allow like bathing suits? Maybe it was just a public thing, but it's just like, that's interesting that they're letting that in this film. I didn't expect it, I guess.
Yeah.
And then obviously the bathtub. I mean, it's like, well, if you can't even have a couple sharing the same bed, like, we're gonna show a woman in a bathtub. It seemed like they were not picking. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, because there were definitely more conservative with like the violence.
Yeah.
So like that scene towards the end where the psychologist is fighting Panther version of Arena, and it's like all you see is the shadows. Like there was no actual, blood or like direct violence. But I think that probably worked better for this movie's budget and special effects to also not try to show that and be convincing.
Yeah.
Speaking of the psychologist, it took me a minute to realize that when they showed... So they did this at the very beginning and at the very end, where they had like a quote that was just written out on the screen. And in the beginning it was, even as fog continues to lie in valleys, so does ancient sin cling to the low places, the depressions in world consciousness. And that quote was attributed to Dr. Lewis Judd, who was the character of the psychologist in the movie.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of, I don't know why, it was really funny to me that they invented a quote from an invented character in the movie that ends up being kind of a douche. It's the opening and closing. Like it just, I don't know why, it cracked me up.
I think it's, for me, I think it was part like, it's almost like the Michael Scott quote of like, you miss 100% of the shots. Because it should have been like the doctor and then also the writer who wrote that line as the one who actually wrote it. But
it was like the people who wrote the script are like, oh, this is super deep. We got to get this in here.
Yeah. Yeah. And also like, he definitely was not the greatest, but neither were any of them.
Yeah, no, there were no real good people in this one.
Yeah. But I guess, like, also, well, here's the thing, though. If, like, that dude got married and hadn't even kissed his lady yet, and, like, was with her, I don't know how long, but long enough without that. So, like, I felt like he did love her. But, get a smooch every once in a while. That's just science.
Yeah.
So I think that he gets at least a little bit of a credit.
He wasn't malicious.
He tried.
He was just a little horny.
Just, and little Alice came through,
Yeah.
She listened. She didn't talk about a cat all day.
Yeah.
She could probably throw trash into the trash can from 5 feet away.
And she's a swimmer.
She swims. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was kind of weird because towards the end it felt like Oliver and Alice became like buddy cops. Like they were just like running from crime scene to crime scene.
Yeah.
They're just always in the right place and investigating. But
it kind of reminded me of Psycho, where the sister and fiance, like it almost seemed like the sister and fiance were a couple. Just like maybe it's the chemistry between the actors or something like that. But it kind of felt similar to that, even though we only had that for a tiny bit of time in Psycho. But I definitely had the same thought where it was like, well, they actually get along, so it's more than most relationships.
Yeah, over the course of watching this one, like in my notes, I had a lot of stuff about how something reminded me of things that they did in Psycho. And I think overall, like I didn't love this movie. It was a lot slower paced and honestly more boring than the last two, but it did have kind of that psychological, suspenseful, what's actually going on vibe to it. And like I could see an argument that maybe Psycho took inspiration from this one, or like at least from this formula, and then built on it and delivered something way better. But I don't know. This one I feel like was an early version of a lot of things that we saw become sort of staples of future psychological horror movies. And that's kind of interesting just from the idea that it was a low budget B movie that was mostly just made to stick on with another higher budget movie.
Do you think that some of these B movies are initially like, created to be an A movie, and then they're like just going through and they're like, well, what can we make for a lower budget? And they saw this and they're like, let's do that one. And the reason why I ask that is because that might make it more of a defined storyline, or, concept considering. But they were just like, well, this doesn't involve a ton of characters, so we don't have to have a ton of actors. We can save money on this film. We can't save money on Gone with the Wind or whatever movie.
Honestly, I don't know. From the perspective of like the person writing the script, I don't know if they were like commissioned to write a cheaper movie to make, or if the studio was just going through the backlog of scripts they had and thinking, yeah, we could make that one on a lower budget. Yeah. I do think that they definitely were leaning towards subject matter that would be a little bit more like shocking or intriguing.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Just because then like the concept of it is a little bit more gripping to people than it's like, oh yeah, a movie about like this strange foreign woman who's cursed with this, ancient Satanist cult thing that makes her turn into a cat and terrorize people. Like, that sounds wildly intriguing and not like any movie I've ever heard of. I should go see what that's about, as opposed to, oh, we have a movie that's based on this famous novel and it's starring Charlton Heston and these other big names. And then people are like, oh yeah, I bet that's a good movie. I should go see it.
That's a good point.
But it's all just speculation on my end.
That's what
I wasn't even born for this.
We're here to just speculate.
Yeah. Professional speculators.
Mm-hmm.
Did you like this one more than Mask of Fu Manchu or Dr. X?
I definitely thought it was an easier watch than both of them, but no, I think that no, it's probably the order of what we did. So Dr. X, the Mask of Fu Manchu, and this is the order of how much I liked them, but I haven't had too big of an issue with any of them. So I would definitely say I didn't like it more, but it's just right up there with them. I hadn't seen... there isn't one that has stood out to me out of the three.
For me, this one was kind of surprising. In my mind, the early B movies were going to be a lot more of just kind of the action adventure by the seat of your pants, lots of stuff going on type movies. And this one really has changed my perception of what B movies were at the time. So I'm glad that we watched it for that reason.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have no beef with it. And plus, I was kind of struggling to find some that would work for the 40s. So this just kind of works out.
Yeah, and the one that we're going to talk about next week, I'm really interested to chat with you about, just from a kind of Hollywood studio history perspective. And so, yeah, we'll be back and we'll be looking at one that, not to tip the hand too much, but wasn't from one of the big Hollywood studios for the first time. And so that's going to be a lot of fun. And it was one that was like significantly lower budget even than this one. And so, yeah, we're going to get back into a totally different perspective on what B movies could be in the 40s.
Like it. Not a bad pick, Damie.
Doing all right. Cruising on through, learning as we go along. But the real B movie is the friends we made along the way. Which is just us. Because it's a two-man show.
I was going to say, who's the friend? I was about to get mad, but I won't. I'm jealous.
It's you. It's always been you.
Thanks, man.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com. Or hit us up on the IG. That's what the kids call Instagram. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.